December 20th, 1943, 5 miles above the frozen earth of Germany, Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown was the pilot of a Ghost. His B-17 bomber, the Ye Olde Pub, was a flying coffin, shot to pieces and flying on a single engine and a prayer. His tail gunner was dead, half his crew wounded or unconscious, and the icy wind of the upper atmosphere screamed through the shredded fuselage. Alone and defenseless, Brown saw it appear off his wing. A German Messerschmitt Bf 109, the deadliest fighter in the Luftwaffe, flown by an ace with 27 kills to his name. For the German pilot, Franz Stigler, this was the easiest victory of his career. One more kill and he would earn the Knight's Cross, Germany's highest medal for valor. He lined up the crippled American bomber in his sights, his thumb resting on the trigger. But he didn't fire. What he did next would be buried as a military secret for over 40 years, an act of chivalry so profound it defied the very nature of war. Before we dive into one of the most incredible untold stories of World War II, hit subscribe to uncover the battlefield truths you've never heard before. The mission was supposed to be a routine bombing run on an aircraft factory in Bremen. For 21-year-old Charlie Brown, a farm boy from West Virginia, whose quiet confidence belied his inexperience, it was his first combat flight as an aircraft commander. He and his crew were green, flying a plane nicknamed Ye Olde Pub, and they were about to enter the most heavily defended airspace in the world. As they approached the target, the sky erupted in black puffs of flak, each one a small, dark cloud of razor-sharp shrapnel. The bomber shuddered violently as shell fragments tore through its thin aluminum skin. Then came the fighters, swarms of them, over 150 German interceptors climbing through the flak, diving on the American bomber formation like a pack of wolves. Brown remembered the briefing officer's words that morning. "If you fall out of formation, you're dead. The 109 pilots are vultures. They'll tear you apart piece by piece, and they'll enjoy it." Now watching the black shapes diving through the flak, Brown understood what he meant. The Ye Olde Pub was savaged in minutes. A cannon shell obliterated the plexiglass nose, instantly killing the bombardier and exposing the front of the plane to a -60°C wind. Another shell tore through the radio room, knocking the radio operator unconscious. Engine 2 was on fire. Engine 4 was dead. The hydraulic systems were gone, the oxygen was failing, and the instrument panel in front of Brown was a shattered ruin. He fought to keep the plane level, his hands numb, his mind a frantic swirl of emergency procedures. Through the intercom, he could hear only the screams of his wounded men and the terrifying silence of the dead. With a final lurching shudder, the Ye Olde Pub fell out of formation, becoming a straggler. In the skies over Germany, a straggler was a dead man, a wounded animal left behind for the wolves to finish. And the Alpha Wolf was on his way. On the ground, at a German air base, Lieutenant Franz Stigler had just landed his Messerschmitt. An American bullet was lodged in its radiator, a souvenir from a recent skirmish. He was a veteran of over 400 combat missions, a man who had fought in the deserts of North Africa and the skies over the English Channel. He was also an ace on the verge of greatness. He needed one more confirmed kill to be awarded the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, an honor that would make him a national hero. Stigler was known among his squadron as the Hunter. Methodical, precise, efficient. He didn't waste ammunition. He didn't miss. In North Africa, he had shot down 3 British bombers in a single afternoon. As he was refueling, a ground crewman pointed to the sky. A lone B-17, crippled and flying dangerously low, was limping away from the main bomber stream. It was a gift from the gods of war. Ignoring his fatigue, Stigler jumped back into his cockpit. "Don't bother with the cannons," he told the crew. "Just the machine guns. This will be quick." He took off, his fighter climbing like a rocket, straight toward the helpless American bomber. This would be kill number 28. He would be home in time for lunch. Part 2. The Hunter and the Hunted. Stigler closed the distance with practiced ease of a predator. From a half-mile back, the B-17 looked pathetic, a wounded bird struggling against the inevitable. Its landing gear was down on one side, a clear sign of hydraulic failure. It was flying at a dangerously low altitude, barely maintaining airspeed. This wasn't a hunt. It was a mercy killing. He moved into the bomber's 6 o'clock position, the classic kill zone directly behind the tail. This was where the American tail gunner should have opened fire, stitching the sky with .50 caliber rounds. Stigler braced for it, but there was only silence. The tail guns were dark and lifeless, pointing uselessly at the sky. Strange. Stigler eased his fighter closer, his curiosity piqued. He slid to the side, out of the blind spot, to get a look at the bomber's fuselage. What he saw stopped him cold. The ye-old pub wasn't just damaged, it was anatomically dissected. Huge, gaping holes in its side revealed the internal structure of the aircraft. The entire top-mounted turret was gone, blown clean off. The skin of the plane was shredded, peeling back in the wind like aluminum foil. He could see daylight straight through the other side. This plane wasn't flying. It was being held together by a miracle. Inside the cockpit, Charlie Brown heard his co-pilot, Pinky Luke, gasp, "Fighter, on our tail!" Brown didn't need to look. He knew. He had been waiting for this moment since they'd fallen out of formation. This was the end. He gripped the controls, his knuckles white. There was nothing he could do. He couldn't run, couldn't fight, couldn't even dive. The plane was a brick, barely responding to his commands. All he could do was fly straight and wait for the bullets that would tear them out of the sky. He glanced at his crew. The co-pilot was wounded. The navigator was slumped over his table. The screams over the intercom had faded to weak moans. They were all dead or dying. He was the captain of a ghost ship, and his only remaining duty was to die with it. Stigler, meanwhile, was wrestling with a profound sense of disbelief. He had never seen an aircraft this heavily damaged still in the air. His curiosity now overriding his killer instinct, he did something incredibly dangerous and completely against protocol. He pulled his Messerschmitt up, leveled with the American bomber's cockpit, flying just 50 feet off its wing. He needed to see the men he was about to kill. This was the moment, the climactic emotional payoff where two enemies, separated by war, politics, and a few feet of freezing air, would finally meet. Through the shattered glass of the B-17 cockpit, Franz Stigler looked into the eyes of Charlie Brown. He didn't see a monster. He didn't see the hated Amis from the propaganda posters, the gangsters and cowboys who were firebombing his country. He saw a boy, younger than himself, his face pale with terror and a grim, hopeless resolve. He saw the pilot's eyes go wide with shock, then narrow with the acceptance of his own death. Then Stigler's gaze was drawn past the pilot, through the massive, gaping hole where the top turret used to be. And what he saw inside the fuselage made his blood run cold. He saw the American crew. It was a scene of pure carnage. Men lay slumped in their positions, their uniforms dark with blood. One crewman, the medic, was frantically trying to tend to a man whose leg had been nearly severed. They were not soldiers anymore. They were victims. In that instant, something broke inside Franz Stigler. He was a Luftwaffe pilot, a hunter, a man on the verge of receiving his nation's highest honor. But he was also something else. He was a former airline pilot, a man who had once believed in the romance of the sky. And he was a devout Catholic. His older brother, August, also a Luftwaffe pilot, had been killed earlier in the war. He knew the pain of loss. But most importantly, he remembered the words of his first commanding officer, a man he revered, Gustav Rodel. During a briefing in North Africa, Rodel had told his young pilots something they never forgot. "You are fighter pilots now. You are part of an elite. But there are rules of honor. If I ever see or hear of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself." Stigler looked at the B-17. This was worse than a man in a parachute. This was a flying hearse. To shoot it down would not be combat. It would not be a victory. It would be murder. His thumb slid off the trigger. He could not do it. He would not do it. The Knight's Cross, the glory, the 28th kill, it all turned to ash in his mouth. In that moment, his honor as a man became more important than his duty as a soldier. Part 3. The Guardian Angel. Charlie Brown stared at the German fighter, his mind unable to process what was happening. The pilot was just flying there. He wasn't shooting. He was looking at them. Brown could see his face clearly, the goggles pushed up on his forehead, the intent, searching expression in his eyes. Was this some kind of psychological torture? Was he toying with them before the kill? Then the German pilot did something even more bizarre. He gestured with his hands, pointing down toward the ground, then making a motion like a landing. He was trying to tell them to land their plane. Brown shook his head frantically. Land? In Germany? They would be captured, sent to a POW camp. But more than that, he couldn't land. The plane was too damaged. The landing gear was stuck. A landing would be a catastrophic, fiery crash. The German pilot seemed to understand. He nodded slowly. Then he did something that defied all logic, an act of such unbelievable chivalry that Brown would spend the rest of his life struggling to comprehend it. Franz Stigler repositioned his Messerschmitt. He moved from the B-17's right side and carefully slid his fighter underneath the bomber, reappearing on its left wing. He was putting himself in formation with the American plane. Brown was baffled. What was he doing? Then the horrifying realization dawned on him. They were approaching a massive German anti-aircraft battery on the coast. He could see the flak guns on the ground, preparing to fire. A lone, crippled B-17 would be an easy target for them. But the German gun crews on the ground would see something different. They would see a German fighter escort a damaged aircraft. An escort was a clear signal. Do not fire. This plane is under our control. Stigler was using his own plane, his own identity as a Luftwaffe pilot, as a human shield to protect his enemies from his own countrymen. He was risking not just a court-martial, but being shot down by friendly fire. For 10 minutes they flew like this, a bizarre and silent pair of angels, one broken, one guarding. Brown, his heart hammering in his chest, flew the straightest course of his life. He watched the German flak batteries pass harmlessly beneath them. The German pilot never wavered. He stayed locked on Brown's wing, a steady, protective presence. They reached the North Sea, the grey, choppy water, a beautiful, welcome sight. They were out of German airspace. They were safe. Stigler pulled his fighter up, level with Brown's cockpit one last time. He looked across the void, from one pilot to another. He locked eyes with Charlie Brown. He raised his hand in a slow, formal salute. Then he peeled his fighter away, banking sharply and heading back toward Germany, disappearing into the clouds. Brown sat there, stunned, watching the empty sky where his guardian angel had been. He was alone again, but he was alive. Against all odds, he still had to fly the ye-old pub 250 miles across the unforgiving North Sea. It was a grueling, terrifying flight. With no navigation equipment and only one semi-functional engine, he flew by instinct, aiming the nose of his shattered plane for England. Miraculously, he made it. He found an Allied airbase and brought the plane in for a landing that was more of a controlled crash. The moment the wheels touched the runway, the plane broke apart, but the crew, incredibly, was safe. At the debriefing, his hands still shaking, Charlie Brown told his commanding officers everything that had happened. He told them about the German pilot, the strange escort, the salute. He expected them to be as shocked as he was. Instead, he was met with cold, hard silence. The intelligence officer looked at him, his expression unreadable. "Lieutenant," the officer said, his voice flat, "you will not repeat this story to anyone, not to your crew, not to your family, not to another living soul. An honorable German pilot does not exist. It does not fit the narrative. Do you understand? You will file your report and you will omit that detail." Brown was stunned. The most profound and important moment of his life, an act of incredible mercy that had saved him and his crew, was to be buried. It was an inconvenient truth in a world that demanded simple black and white hatred. He was ordered to lie, to erase the one act of humanity that had shone through the darkness. Part 4. The Search. The war ended. Charlie Brown returned home to West Virginia, a decorated pilot, a hero. He tried to build a normal life. He went to college, got married, had a family, and eventually went to work for the State Department. But he was haunted. He never spoke of what happened, obeying the order he had been given. But the memory of the German pilot never left him. In his quiet moments, and in his dreams, he would see the face in the cockpit, the steady gaze, the final, respectful salute. Who was that man? Why had he done it? Had he survived the war? The questions gnawed at him for 40 years. It was a secret he carried alone, a heavy, unanswered question at the center of his knife. Finally, in the late 1980s, retired and with the Cold War thawing, Brown decided he had to know. He had to find the man who had saved him. It was an impossible task. He didn't have a name, a unit, or any information at all, just a memory. He began a painstaking search, writing letters to Luftwaffe veterans associations, publishing ads in German aviation magazines. He received dozens of replies, but none were the right one. Years passed. He was about to give up hope. Then, in 1990, a letter arrived at his home in Seattle. It was postmarked from Vancouver, Canada. The handwriting was neat, precise, the English slightly formal. The letter began, "Dear Charlie, for years I have wondered what happened to that B-17. Did she make it home?" Brown's hands trembled as he read on. The letter recounted the events of that day, detail by incredible detail, from the perspective of the German pilot. He wrote of seeing the tail guns silent, of the shock of seeing the wounded crew, of the memory of his commanding officer's words about honor. He signed the letter, Franz Stigler. Brown sat there, the letter in his hand, tears streaming down his face. He had found him. After nearly half a century, he had found his guardian angel.
He picked up the phone, and when Stigler answered, his first words were simple. "My God," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's you." They spoke for hours. Franz told him the rest of the story. He had never reported the incident, knowing he would be court-martialed and executed. He had kept the secret his entire life. He never received the Knight's Cross. The kill he had passed up was the one that would have earned it. "I flew beside you," Franz explained, his voice gentle on the phone. "I was trying to get you to surrender and land in Germany. When you refused, I saw you were heading for the flak batteries. I could not let them shoot you down. It would have been the same as me shooting you myself. It was not honorable." They agreed to meet. The reunion was an emotional, world-stopping event. The two old men, former enemies who had met as hunter and prey 5 miles above the earth, embraced like long-lost brothers. They discovered they had more in common than they could ever have imagined. They were both men who loved the sky, men who had been caught in the machinery of a war they didn't fully understand. For the next 2 decades, Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler became the closest of friends. Their families became intertwined. They traveled the world together, speaking at military gatherings and schools, telling their impossible story. They became a living testament to a battlefield truth that history often forgets: that your enemy is not a faceless monster. He is a man, and within every man there is the capacity for a choice.